And we're live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Bashment Book Club. It's been a minute, but we made it back. We're here, and we're here to talk about Where the Rhythm Takes You by Sarah Das. There's the physical copy of it, which I have not seen. I'm with Sajid, obviously. This month, Linnell couldn't join us, but she's with us in spirit. Wow, you pulling out a whole signed copy, personalized. I think the first place for us to start is because I know you're not, at least last time we talked, you weren't really a romance reader. So I wanted to know what your opinion was of it as a like non-romance person before I get into all the trope talk and all of that.
Well, okay. I have to say I didn't care for like the romantic elements of it,
Mm-hmm.
which I expected because romance usually doesn't really do anything for me, especially if it's a hetero romance. Sorry, not sorry.
Fair. No,
So
that's fair.
I wasn't like super invested, and I didn't care about like the relationship too much,
Mm-hmm.
but I loved other aspects of the book. And so that's the thing about romance for me. Like I could still enjoy a romance novel so long as there's something else for me to read. Like I enjoyed the setting. I also really enjoyed Reina as a main character. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it was good. And I think romance is a genre that pretty much anybody could enjoy, even if you're not a romance reader, because there's more to every romance book than romance.
Is true. To give everyone, if you haven't read the book, like a little synopsis of what this book is about. One, I thought the characters were older when I started reading them because of the narrator. I thought they were in their like 20s. No, these are teenagers. And this girl, she works on her like mom's hotel in Tobago, and then these two girls who she's related to through her sister who are famous come to visit, and they bring this like really famous like soca slash like just reggaeton kind of people with them, and one of them happens to be a guy that she used to date when she was a kid. And then it follows like a second chance romance. They have like miscommunication. There's a whole subplot with her mom who has died prior to the start of this novel, and her dealing with grief, and her dad finding like a new person and all that kind of stuff. So talking a little bit about the plot itself, minus the romance, which did what romance does. How did you feel about like the whole subplot with the mom and the dad, and like the way she was dealing with the hotel, her friend Olivia? Like, what did you think about the other aspects of the story?
I enjoyed them. I think for me with Rena, like I related to a lot of her internal struggles in ways that I wasn't expecting because I was like, oh, this is just like a YA contemporary teenagers and angst and love. I'm not going to relate to it. But Rena, I found her to be really relatable in the sense that she just had this kind of like unshakable loyalty to her mother
Mm-hmm.
and to her family. And, you know, I found it to be a very sort of Caribbean thing because when you come from a small country or a small island, a small community, like you're raised in an environment where it's like you need to prioritize your duty to the community or to your family or to whatever tradition or culture that you grew up in. And so I found it really it really resonated with me, that struggle that Rena had, because when you read the book you'll realize that there's an internal tension between what she wants for herself versus what she thinks she wants. And what she thinks she wants is to remain in the hotel and to live her mother's dream for her. And especially after her mother passed away, there's this kind of like guilt, I need to live up to what her expectations of me would have been, right? And she also
Mm-hmm.
has this kind of like romanticization of her mother. And so the book is kind of about kind of unlearning that romanticization whilst also still honoring her mother's memory. And I found it to be, honestly, it was really good the way that that aspect of the story was handled. Um, and just the whole, she never left Tobago, which was like wild to me. She's never even been to Trinidad, never been on a
Mm-hmm.
plane, yet her family owns a hotel. You'd think that they,
Yeah, yeah.
like would have done trips or stuff growing up. So it was really interesting to see how tethered she was to her community. I found it admirable, but I also found it nice to see that she was slowly kind of delivered from that. I don't know. What did you think about it?
I also agree with like all of that. As the I was wondering, do you need a passport to take a flight from Tobago to Trinidad, or you just
No.
need to get on a plane? Okay, so I was wondering about that. Like, why didn't you at least go? And she said like one time she was supposed to go on a school trip and it got canceled, and then she was just like she's never going anywhere ever. And like I feel like that also is like part of it is she's like underage, so of course like how is she gonna take a flight by herself?
Yeah.
Um, but everything you're saying about like the grief and the mother and like romanticization, that is what specifically made it feel like she was older to me when I didn't realize it was like I thought it was YA, but then I was reading it, like started listening to it and I was like, this feels a little bit more mature than what I thought it was gonna be, especially because like a lot of the struggle she's having is something I would relate to as like an older like 20 something being like, I've given up on my dream, like like all of that kind of talk, like I have to work at the family business, felt very like 20 something like romance book, and I was like, okay, that's interesting. And then when I clued in that she was 17 and he was like the like love interest is 19, I was like, oh, okay, that explains some of like the weird decisions that are being made, and the way people are acting is very like young compared to like some of the like internalized things that we were exploring, which felt like very mature for the book. And that just like what the author's writing was really good in those sections, and that's why it felt like it was like a book geared toward adults more so than kids. And
Definitely like a older YA.
yeah, it definitely felt like an older YA book. And like if you don't normally read YA, this would be one I'm like it has crossover where like even if you don't read YA normally, you would still enjoy it a lot because I spent through it. I would read it all in one sitting if I had the time to just sit down and read it in one go. I thought that like everything else was done really well in terms of like the family dynamics as well. Like I like that the dad toward the end of the book was like, you remember your mom really fondly, but she wasn't always like a great mom because she like put all these pressures on you. And I'm glad it got like unpacked within the book itself, and it wasn't just something that we knew as like readers and that she never really discovered as like a character. I'm curious what your thoughts are about the whole like superstars who come back to the island kind of vibe, and um how that worked for you, because for me that was like the one bit where I was like, this is the one bit where I have to like suspend my like disbelief and just like roll with it, because I feel like I've never really noticed like a culture, at least in Barbados when I was a kid, I didn't notice a culture of like people who would like absolutely freak out and like follow people around and like climb into a hotel to see them, unless it was like Rihanna, which I feel like I guess if they were as famous as Rihanna, it would make sense.
Yeah, it was a bit strange because like I don't think Trinidad doesn't have a Rihanna or
Mm-hmm.
anybody to that level. I mean, Nikki, but not really, because she didn't really grow up here. So it was strange to like have somebody who was like famous, but it felt more like social media famous, like Gen Z
Mm-hmm.
famous. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Not like general. So yeah, that was it was interesting, and I did kind of have to suspend my disbelief. And to be frank, like those were the aspects of the story that I didn't enjoy, and
Mm-hmm.
not so much because of how unbelievable it was, but because of the characters themselves. I didn't really like care for Aidan.
Oh,
um,
wow,
I,
spicy.
I didn't care for Aidan. Like, I mean, I didn't dislike him. He was just kind of there. It was like, oh,
That's fair. That's fair.
yeah, and then I found like Eliza to be insufferable because, and I feel like you
Yeah.
were supposed to kind of dislike her at first because the author was sort of like, oh, she's like a TikToker or like this annoying
Mm-hmm.
blogger or whatever. But then as the story progresses, you get to like or whatever. I didn't quite. It took me a while to realize that Fish and Leo were two different people, and
Stop.
and even then, I was like, why is Leo there? Like Leo
Mm.
just felt honest. Even Haley, they were like,
Truly,
why
like they
not?
were not. There was no like
They were
character
very
development.
peripheral. Yeah, they were very much
Yeah.
like if this was made into a movie, they'd get cut for budget reasons.
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, I agree. I feel like I liked Fish because Fish was the one person that got some kind of like development, and only because he was like talking to Reina more
Yeah,
closely than the others were. So I like that little interaction. But I agree with you. Like thinking back on it now, like thinking on Aiden, there was no character trait other than he was really good at music, and that's why they got famous. And he really just wanted her to pursue art. And also, can we discuss the way he got angry at her for not doing art anymore? It was like kind of strange to me how angry he got, and like how that was part of their like miscommunication stuff. Like I get that he was trying to be supportive and be like you shouldn't like give up on what you want to do, but I just felt like that was very it was a strange choice on the author's part to make that part of the discussion versus them just like separating when he moved.
Yeah, it was strange. I did feel a little uncomfortable too when Olivia also like was like
Yeah,
really.
like they were all pressuring her to do this thing that she's like, I
Yeah,
have grief and like trauma with this and I don't want to be doing it. And they were just like, you have to do this or else you're not a human being, basically.
it's like, you kind of have to. Am I stuck?
Your video is stuck, but your audio is not.
Okay, well that's fine. We'll go with it. It was kind of strange. Oh, not the cat. Um,
Every time it's gonna happen when we live stream it. It's never happened any other time.
yeah, okay, it's back. It's back. Okay. So I use my phone webcam. I use my phone as a webcam, but
Wow.
sometimes the connection is a little shoddy between the phone and the
Mm-hmm.
laptop because it's wireless. So yeah. Um, yeah, I felt like the characters were too mean to her. Like, okay, what they were telling her was true. You're suppressing what you want for what you think you should be, right? Which is you need to live up to your mother's expectations and stay in the hotel and don't tear down the gazebo and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, it's like this is a young, sensitive girl. Like you need to approach her more smart in a more smart way. Like don't just be
Mm-hmm.
like, how dare you give me these expensive brushes? Like
Yeah.
you are suppressing your dream and blah, blah, and it's like just have a conversation. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
maybe that's difficult because she's probably a stubborn person, so you need to kind of give her tough love. But I don't know. I was also really annoyed with William and the
Oh my god, I
gazebo.
forgot about Will. Who is William? Did I felt like I slept through something because I was like, I don't know who this man is and why he's
So
being like
here's the
this.
thing about it, right? I read the first. I remember we were supposed to read this book earlier for this year,
Mm-hmm.
and we put it
Mm-hmm.
off, right? And so we ended up reading Black Cake instead. So I read the first 60 pages, and I DNF'd it. And so when I
Yeah.
picked it up, I didn't start over. I went.
So we will never know who William is or where
Well,
he
I
came
don't
from.
know.
He
Well,
just
apparently
exists.
he's some employee of the hotel,
Mm-hmm.
and there's this gazebo that she loves because it has a lot of memories of her mother or whatnot. And he was just so mean in his desire to tear it down. And
Yeah.
I'm
And
like,
for like what? For what reason did he have to be that way?
this is a young girl who is grieving her for her mother. Clearly, it's not about the gazebo; it's about her mother, right? And
And
she
then
feels
that's why I thought she was old again because she's acting like she's a manager at this hotel and they're like fighting. I'm like she's
yeah.
fighting with this grown man, so she must be a grown woman to be fighting this kind of way for him to be reacting. But no.
And I think that's part of the story's tension too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's a story about like a family that's kind of forcing a young girl, really the mother, to be more grown up than she needs to be
Mm-hmm.
at that particular stage in her life because her mother put all this pressure on her to be the manager or to
Mm-hmm.
have some sort of like thing, but she's 17. And then the dad was the one who was kind of like, go have fun, enjoy yourself or whatever, but not really understanding the internal pressures that she's feeling as much. It's really bad communication.
Mm-hmm.
Like nobody, people knowing what her problem is, but don't know how to get it across to her and
Mm-hmm.
make it make sense to her. And I think that's also why I found her to be quite relatable because I think we all kind of struggle with these intentions of who we should be versus who we want to be and duty versus desire and all that kind of stuff, especially Caribbean people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's so entrenched in our culture, family business, tradition, all that kind of stuff. Um, and so when somebody's struggling, another thing we're bad at as West Indians is communication,
Yeah.
right? And so I feel like that's kind of like what this story was. And I think it made sense that it's a story that's on the precipice of like young adults and new adults in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Because not just because of the age of the character, but because she's in that sort of like transition stage where things are confusing. She's still a child, but she's having to deal with a lot more like mature issues. I think the complexity of her character was definitely my favorite thing about this book.
Mm-hmm.
In my Bookstagram review, I said I didn't care too much about the relationship with the other characters, like her family or friends. I was really more invested in her internal struggle.
That's fair. I'm curious what you thought about like the setting itself as well, since you obviously are from Trinidad. Did you have any like strong feelings about the setting or like the audio? We both listened to this, so I'm curious how you thought about like the audiobook because it was obviously done fully in an accent the entire way through.
Yeah.
I didn't check about the audio, like the actor who did the audiobook. I wasn't sure if they were actually from Trinidad or not.
I think she's Trinidadian, so it was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
The minute I started listening to the audio, I was like, "Oh, this is definitely a Trinidadian. This is not a
Mm.
Tobagonian because
Mm-hmm.
Tobagonians do have a different accent, a slightly
Okay.
different accent. It depends on the Tobagonian you talk to because some of them have more Trinidadian sounding accents.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when I was listening to it, I was like, "This is sounding like a bougie Trini accent." Just the way that she was pronouncing things, there's a difference
Mm-hmm.
between like the general Trini accent and somebody who's a little bit more refined, to say the least.
Fair. Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I figured, like, if this is the best they could do, then I'm happy with it
Fair.
because you
It's
know
better than an American trying to do
that
an
Trinidadian
accent.
accent and sounding Jamaican. So I
Mm-hmm.
was pleased with the narration. I think the narrator was she has an amazing voice. She did a good job
She
at,
did.
at reading the story as well. Um, and yeah, and I mean, given Reina's kind of like socio-economic position, it didn't feel
Mm-hmm.
too far removed. She's like the daughter. She's a hotel heiress. Okay, it's London Tipton. Uh,
Not
but
London
smart.
Tipton.
Yeah, so I was okay with that, but oh, not the cat again. Um, with regards to the setting, so obviously I'm from Trinidad. I've never really been to Tobago growing up.
Mm-hmm.
I went for the first time last year, and then this summer I went twice for the second and third time. So it was interesting to see her sort of describe Tobago versus my experience of it. I felt like it was very different because I just stayed
Mm-hmm.
in like a typical like resort hotel place, whereas this is the perspective of somebody who lives there. But it was
Mm-hmm.
still also touristy, so it was a nice balance between like the tourist perspective and the local perspective. Um, and then part of it is set in northern Tobago, which is the less touristy part. Southern Tobago is really where all the resorts and all that kind of stuff is. So it was different. I can't really speak to the accuracy of how the
Mm-hmm.
island was portrayed, but I could tell that the author's writing is so good. Like you could tell that she does a really good job at describing the island with like a sense of love and care and nuance. I also appreciated there was a point where she was having a conversation with Fish, and Fish said something like, "Oh, I wish I was living in the
Yeah.
Caribbean because y'all are so lucky. Y'all get to go to the beach every day." And she was like, people have jobs and school and
Mm-hmm.
lives. Like not everybody, most people who live in the region don't. I don't think my mother's been to a beach in 2 decades. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like
Yeah.
there's life outside of the coast.
Yeah, I feel like the same for my mom. Honestly, I have to like force her to go to the beach. Woman does not like it. Like some people in the Caribbean, believe it or not, just don't like the beach. They don't like sand. They will not be going anywhere near it.
I'm not a beach
Um,
person. Call me blasphemous. I go like twice or three times for the year, and I'm usually
mm,
dragged. I never go
oh my
voluntarily.
god. No, I'm the person that does the dragging. I'll be like, I'm coming to visit. We have to go. So everyone has to go to the beach when I'm home.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, I agree with you about the narration. I thought that the interesting thing that she did is it felt like it was the character telling the story because she would do like the laughing, she would like pause at certain points that you were getting the perspective of the character as she realizes, oh, Fish is randomly dancing with the woman. Let me pause before I say that he's randomly dancing with some like that kind of it was an actual like it felt like acting and like you're
yeah,
portraying the story in a way instead of just like reading the words. So I think that definitely added to my enjoyment of the overall story was like being able to hear it because I also like read along on an ebook while I was like listening.
yeah.
So I felt like it really like added to the full experience and having like an accent that didn't feel completely false also
Yeah,
really helped. And I agree about the like socioeconomic stuff, like if she sounded a little bougie, because that was something that Aiden pointed out when they were kids was like, you go to this
yeah.
private school, so you clearly have a different life from me.
Mhm.
I'm curious what you thought about the pacing and plot of it. Um, did you realize this was supposed to be based on Persuasion by Jane Austen?
So I knew that it was, but
Yeah.
I couldn't tell because I never read Persuasion.
Okay. Have you
I
seen any of the movies? Did you watch the new movie on Netflix? Like, any reference?
I've
Okay.
never consumed anything Jane Austen before. I have all the books looking really pretty on my shelves.
Sajid.
One day they'll be read.
Sajid. And I like books. Forget about the books and watch the movies or something. My God.
No, I'm the kind of person like I need to read the books.
Okay.
Like I have to I have to read the books, but no. I know the plot of Persuasion has something to do with I think her family also owns like a hotel or bed and breakfast or something.
her family's rich and they don't like the guy because he's not rich. So they tell her that she shouldn't marry him.
Ah, okay,
And
okay,
then
okay.
he goes away and comes back rich. So that's like the like he goes back, comes back
Oh, okay,
famous.
okay, 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 okay,
Yeah.
all right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, well, I mean, I didn't I kind of like trusted that the author did
Hmm.
connections with the story. I did find aspects of the plot to kind of like drag. There were certain scenes where they were just having conversations or doing things, and I'm like, I really don't need to see this. Like, give me
Hmm.
some of that juicy internal struggle that I enjoy so much. But as somebody who has is familiar with the source material, what did you think of the connections? Would you say, because I
Yeah.
wondered if this was a retelling or if it was just like a
Hmm.
persuasion inspired story, so I don't know, like where
Yeah.
would you put it on that spectrum?
I didn't even realize it was supposed to be based on persuasion. I know, like, we had this discussion at some point where I was like, "Oh my god, Jane Austen inspired, great, love it," but it completely skipped my brain when I sat down to read this book. So it wasn't until I was like looking up after to like see where the author was born and like do that little bit of research before we started that I was like, "Oh, it's a persuasion like inspired story." But now that I'm like saying like, "Oh, like he was like poor, came back as a famous," I was like, there are definitely elements to it, but it
Mhm.
stood so much on its own as a story that it didn't even need that comparison. Like, it didn't need to be like, oh, this is persuasion, because since it didn't really rely too heavily on those plot points, other than like maybe some characters who are similar and like the very basic like second chance romance elements of it, it wasn't really like, it didn't feel like it was a full like Jane Austen inspired novel at all. Especially with the socioeconomic stuff, like it was mentioned that he isn't as like rich as her or whatever, but like it didn't really feel like that when I was reading, because like it was so focused on them just like writing and like more focused on their hobbies and like their passions
Yeah.
versus like how their different social classes might have impacted the way that they grew up. I felt like that wasn't really part of the story to me, other than like some brief mentions here and there.
Yeah, I think that would have been more interesting to explore, and it could have built a little bit
Mm-hmm.
more tension between Eden and Reina. Because I did find like, okay, yeah, she didn't go to the airport to see him off or whatever, but they had a fight, and like it just felt like something more should have triggered that tension. And I think
Mm-hmm.
the class difference would have been interesting because class disparity in the Caribbean is a huge topic of
Exactly. Yeah.
discussion, right? And it's something that's not really talked about a lot. Like when people talk about social issues, they tend to focus on racism and sexuality and gender and all that kind of stuff, but people rarely talk about class. And in the
Mm-hmm.
Caribbean, you see it more because it we don't have big white populations. So
Yeah.
really, where you see a lot of that socioeconomic divide is really in class a lot of the time. So I think it would have been interesting to kind of delve a little bit more into that. But I guess that might have that's a touchy and complicated area to delve into too.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like it would have been interesting to explore between specifically Olivia and Reina, because I feel like that's where it was really shown was like Olivia was like working every day so that she could afford to be able to go to school in a different country. But that also felt very like rushed in a way, because like Olivia in the beginning is like, oh, I can just like skip my shift or my mom can dock my pay or whatever. I'm like, don't you need this money to like survive? It felt like very like that was the one area where I feel like it sort of like dipped, and I was like, okay, like this could be explored more and fleshed out more, but it wasn't really being touched. So I'm not really going to consider it as part of the story.
Yeah.
Um, I know you don't really read for romance, but do you have any particularly strong thoughts about the second chance romance between Aiden and Reina? Do you feel it was completely unbelievable? Was it just meh?
Um, I didn't think it was unbelievable. Actually, I thought it was very realistic. Because I mean, if
Mm,
you break up with somebody like that, like they literally had no resolution when they broke up
yeah,
the first time. They didn't even break up. He left and she blocked him.
so
And
petty but beautiful.
yeah, and I mean, the impulsive behavior in Reina, I actually really related to. Not that I've been in
Mm-hmm.
a relationship at the tender age of 25, but like that, like I understand. Sometimes it's easier to just sort of like then deal with it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that it was I thought that it was done realistic in the sense that they had a lot of stuff unresolved, and then when he came back, they never attempted to talk about it. They were hanging out together, and then like he had this whole romantic sexual tension with Eliza going on, and she had to deal
Mm-hmm.
with like imagine you broke up with somebody who you still had feelings for, and then you see them years later when they are famous and everybody knows who they are, and now
Mm-hmm.
they have some other famous chick all up under them, and you just have to be the tour guide. Like that
Mm-hmm.
is like that's just
Yeah.
torture, honestly. So I did find like the reconnection to be realistic. I was kind of hoping that towards the end they would not end up together, but I guess
Mm-hmm.
romance books like to kind of do that. But I think it would have been more interesting because I mean they're teenagers and they were each other's first loves, and it would
Yeah.
have been. I feel like it would have been more realistic if they had had like a nice moment where they acknowledge their love for each other, but decide I have to move on to certain things. You are, especially because they're not going to end up living in the same place, right? I have to move
Yeah.
on to certain things. You have to move on to certain things. We don't need to be together. And she got into NYU. I was like, okay, what she applied for and get into NYU?
Yeah, I feel yeah, like the whole romance element of it was very interesting because like obviously as I'm reading I'm like yes I'm here I ship it it's great like whatever but I also had that brief moment where I was like I don't know like one I'd like to fish more I thought he was fucking hilarious and like he was very interesting in like his perspective. I always end up having second lean syndrome which is something from like K-dramas where like you always like the second person that is like
Yeah,
nicer to them in general more than you like the person that they're obviously going to end up with. um and yeah, Aiden's perspective, I don't know. I just felt like there wasn't enough time between when they had broken up and when we get them reintroduced. It was like a year or something. It wasn't even like that long versus like in
yeah,
Precision, it's like years have gone, it's like 7 or some odd years have gone by. But then again, like the age restrictions of like this kind of story
yeah.
make it difficult. And that's why part of like the romance felt very like unrelatable because I'm like, why are y'all fighting this hard? Y'all are 19 and 17. Like, is this really gonna last? We don't know.
Yeah, like to me, she had said something like, "I feel like I was 14 again," and I'm like, "Baby, you're 17."
It's not that big a difference, I swear. Like
No,
you are basically 14 right now.
no. When I was like from 12 to 18, it was probably the same thing.
Same,
It was
same.
the same thing. This thing, 17, you're like, I feel 14 again. Shut up.
That was definitely part. I was like, that is like the only reason where I was like, it should have just stood on his own versus like trying to like be inspired by like having that weight added onto it. It doesn't really like help the case of the story that much. But like when you're a teenager, you think everything is the end of the world. You feel like
Yeah,
everything is more important than it actually is the older you get. So I would be curious if we had like a look into their future to see how things are going. Like I would love a sequel where we learn, oh, they're not together anymore. What's happening here? And they run into each other. So please, Sarah, write that for me
a,
specifically.
a
Thank
third
you.
chance romance.
Not third time's the charm, okay? It's a saying.
Yeah, I think actually I think that this might have been better as an adult novel because
Mm-hmm. I agree.
I think the YA restrictions kind of held it back from going there in terms of a lot of the things that we felt were probably lacking from the story.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess it just depends on what the author wanted to write or what the publisher was willing to push.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's a good story on its own. Don't get me wrong, but it would have
Mm-hmm.
been really interesting to see the nuances that could have been explored if it was a little bit more mature. Like if maybe they were in their 20s, because I think that would have been more realistic
That
too.
would have been really good.
But
Yeah.
yeah, and like okay, they parted as teenagers, and
Mm-hmm.
now she's 25 and still working at this hotel, and it feels a little bit more realistic.
Mm-hmm.
And the time,
Especially because there's a part in the beginning where she's visiting Olivia at like the restaurant she works at, and Olivia's talking about, oh, like you haven't dated anyone since Aiden left, and she's like listing all these guys that like have been interested in her that she doesn't. Again, this added to the I thought they were 20 when I was listening to it getting my groceries yesterday because it was like very confusing to me that she was saying listen to these things like all these men have been interested in her and it doesn't sound like there's a lot of men whatever and I was like you're 17 and you're like there's these 5 men that have like tried to reach out to you whatever. It just felt like there was like elements of it where if it was like a young adult like a new adult kind of age novel it would have made a lot more sense
yeah,
basically. So I
nobody was
wonder part of that was the publisher like if the
nobody
publisher
was
was like
lining
no it
up.
has to be away.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah.
Nobody was lining up for me when I was 17. So.
Honestly, like that list, I was like, oh, she's like in her like mid to late 20s. She's had some interest and changed and like turned it down. No, sis is 17.
No.
These were all secondary school men asking about her.
Yeah, literally. I'm like, does that even count? Do people even count secondary school like as
I don't think so.
like?
My final question for you today is: will you read more Sarah? Like, are you interested in this author in general, their writing style? Would you dip back in?
I don't know. It might depend on what she writes. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know if I mean I honestly only stuck through this because we had to read it for Bashment and
Fair.
what there were definitely good elements that like again the writing, the setting and the main characters' internal struggles. I think those were the three things that really kept me invested. But I don't know if I would dive into another story like that. I would be really interested to see what she does if she writes adult fiction. I
Mm-hmm.
think that would be so cool, especially because adult, you know, recently in Trinidad, there's been like a spike of like adult writers writing like literary as well as romance type books.
Interesting.
And
Okay, yeah.
they, like N.G. Peltier, and then we had Love After Love, and When We Were
Mm-hmm.
Birds, and The Bread the Devil Need, and like all of these books are just and like there's this local culture of really celebrating those books. I haven't
Mm-hmm.
really seen this one roped into that too much, and I guess because it's because of the age difference. So I
Yeah.
think like she might have a huge opportunity to break into that adult market and maybe add because I think in terms of like I think she could write a bomb adult romance novel.
Oh
Like
yeah, 100%.
like I think this genre, this age limit kind of held her back a little bit, held
Mm-hmm.
back a little bit potential. So I would read her again definitely, but it would depend on what she writes.
Yeah, I was gonna say
You?
like I definitely liked her writing. Like I thought it was so easy to read. It was such a quick read. It was so well done. I had like the only complaints like we've had is like, oh, like if this was an adult book, this would have made more sense, or like I wish she could have explored this more, but because it's a YA book, we couldn't really get into it. So I feel like the same way as like I would read her other books, like regardless of if they're YA or not, I would just note that I'm gonna have these problems probably going into it where her writing feels more mature than the actual genre that she's writing for,
Yeah.
like the audience she's supposed to be like writing toward.
Yeah, I think I think it's a case of it's a good book. Like honestly, if
Mm-hmm.
you
It's such
are
a
a
good
young
book.
adult, if you're a teenager, this is a 5-star read for you. But
100%.
yeah, but if you're looking for something a little bit more mature, this is something that you will enjoy, but you will just kind of feel like certain elements could go further.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, I feel like the audience, like this book is meant for, will definitely enjoy it for sure. And it was really nice to see that it was getting a little bit of buzz last year when it was published.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it kind of died down, and I wish that more people could, pick it up because I think it's so cool because it's Tobago first of all. Like you don't see that like
Mm-hmm.
whenever Trinidad and Tobago, the few books that we have that goes um, you know, that people hear about, they're always set in Trinidad.
Mm-hmm.
This is the first book I've ever read that takes place in Tobago. I know of two more. There's
Wow.
probably a few more, but I'm sure there's no more than like a dozen books that
Mm-hmm.
actually take place in Tobago. I know there's a new romance novel coming out soon by
Ooh,
somebody
okay.
who was on one of those reality shows, Love Island or something like that.
I feel like I will figure this out after the live because I feel like I know who it is. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we talked about it.
Yeah.
The romance novel. I don't think the person is from Trinidad, so it might be
Mm-mm.
more of a tourist perspective thing. So like the characters are probably like global north, and they come to Tobago.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's not a lot of stories that like really take place from an authentic Tobagonian perspective, and I hope to read more. I hope that this opens up the doors for more of that and more small island representation. Because like when it's Caribbean literature, it's always Trinidad, Jamaica, Guyana, Barbados, maybe sometimes, and
Mm-hmm.
then everybody else, you just don't hear about them as much.
It's true. And I feel like this was one of the few books we read where it's not trauma porn. It's not a
Yeah,
lot about like the harder parts of living. It was very light and fluffy, and I please more of these set in the Caribbean by Caribbean authors because it hits different when it is like a Caribbean author that is writing specifically like these kind of romances because it feels more rooted and like what would be more realistic for people living on these islands.
yeah, absolutely. And like everybody's everyday experience here is not defined by oppression
Mm-hmm.
every single day, right? So it's like it's important to have stories that don't um, portray life in the Caribbean as just like racism and sexism and abuse and this and trauma and all
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. I think it's a really valuable thing, and I think that's why I'm really glad to see that there's a growing romance genre as well in the Caribbean.
Hmm.
And I hope to see more, even like literary novels that don't, because every literary novel has some kind of like trauma or sadness to it, right?
Of
But I
course.
think some of them focus a little bit too much on the kind of like oppression, racism, poverty, abuse kind of stuff. Like there are other things that people can struggle with, like
Hmm.
internal family struggles. Like kind of like what we read in here. That's very
Hmm.
Caribbean. That pressure between what your family wants, what your community wants, versus what you want for yourself. Like I think that could make a really good tension filled adult story. You know.
Hmm. And I feel like part of that is also it goes back to like the publisher and editorial gaze and what they expect out of a story set in these places, and like the forces of like authors feel like in order to be published they have to write these kinds of stories in order to like get the deals and get in front of people. So I'm curious to see like with more of these books having more successes if that's going to like shift the kinds of books that people are allowed to write now.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that we see more of that. I, I tried to read Love After Love. And
Mm-hmm.
the first chapter was like an Indo Caribbean guy abusing his wife and son, and like
Yeah.
it's like I get that that's a thing, and like I'm not mad at the author for writing something that is a real experience, but like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, we've seen this 100 times. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like Serious Blooms at Night, all these stories. Like, I think there's just so much more potential.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. Do you have any other things you want to talk about with this book? Slash, do you remember what our next book is supposed to be? Did we choose one? Wild.
I think we were saying that we would do the Love Island person.
We can't do the love. I would read that book. So if we
Hold
want
on,
to do that
let
as our
me
next one,
see. Love. I don't even know the name of the Love Island Tobago
oh my god,
romance novel.
you're getting this live behind the scenes. Look at us figuring out our next read.
Um, is it Amber Rose Gill?
Is it Amber? Is it my babe Amber? I was obsessed with her in season
Until I
two.
Met You by Amber Rose Gill.
We have to read it. I'm sorry, it's a
All
must.
right, yeah, this is it. Yeah, it was meant to be a holiday of a lifetime for Samantha. The launch of her travel blog, her best friend's wedding, and hopefully her own marriage proposal until she finds herself on her way to Tobago, single.
Oh my god. So definitely is gonna be like a tourist perspective of it. So I'm
Yeah,
curious to compare. It'd be fun to compare this book to that one to be like,
yeah,
which did
yeah.
it better?
Especially because this is also like a tourist perspective, but from the local
Local,
people who
yeah,
work in tourism. So
yeah,
it'd be interesting to like see the comparison.
indeed.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess you heard it here first.
Yes,
And we've
y'all
heard it
like
here first. Our
reading.
next book is Until I Met You by Amber Rose Gill, who I was obsessed with in season 5 of Love Island.
I think it's available now. Yeah, it came
Yeah,
out. Came out. It's like a brand new release. So
yeah. So
hello.
here we go.
Yeah,
Now we
I
know,
know
and it's
you and
another like
Manel will both have
romance.
me reading romance.
We about to convert you. It's coming.
I'm excited. I'm excited. So now I
Okay.
know 3 other books set in Tobago.
There you go. Two of them are romances, so Tobago's doing well for itself. Alrighty, you guys, let us know if you have any other questions because if not, we're gonna head out. But this was a great discussion for like I was worried we wouldn't even be able to get half an hour of discussion out of it just because it felt like such a light read.
Yeah, but there
Yeah,
was a lot to talk about.
there was. We highly recommend this. I would give it 4 stars because like I did have my problems, but I did really enjoy reading it. But
I gave it like 3, but keep in mind this
yeah,
isn't my
it's
wheelhouse.
true. I am a romance person, and I say give this one a go.
I would say objectively, it's like a 4.5 star.
Yeah, there we go. The objective. We love the objectively. All right, guys. We'll talk to you next time. We'll come back with dates and times when we do. You know how this works by this point. We'll see you when we see you.
We'll see you when we see you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.